The same people who locked their cars when he walked by now watched in horror as the black teenager approached the aggressive dog. What happened next made even the most prejudiced neighbor tremble. Michael Johnson's footsteps echoed against the concrete as he walked home from the library, his backpack heavy with books about animal behavior. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Sacramento's upscale Highland Park neighborhood. He adjusted his plain gray shirt, noticing how it stuck to his skin in the humid air. A woman in yoga pants clutched her purse tighter as she passed him. Michael kept his eyes forward, his jaw clenching slightly. He'd seen that reaction too many times to count in this predominantly white neighborhood. Just 3 more blocks, he muttered under his breath. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Michael picked up his pace, glancing at the darkening clouds overhead. The weather matched his mood, heavy and uncertain. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his mom. "Working late again, honey. Left money for pizza on the counter. Love you." Michael typed back quickly. "Okay, Mom. Don't work too hard." He knew she would anyway. She always did. The houses around him grew more expensive with each block. 2-story Mediterranean-style homes with perfectly trimmed hedges and luxury cars in the driveways. Michael passed Mr. Thompson's house. The same house where, 2 months ago, the old man had crossed the street rather than share the sidewalk with him. A dog barked somewhere nearby. Michael didn't think much of it at first. There were always dogs barking in Highland Park. But this bark sounded different. Aggressive. Desperate. Mrs. Peterson hurried inside her house, practically slamming the door. 2 teenagers who had been washing a car in their driveway quickly went inside. The barking grew louder. Then came the scream. It pierced the air like a knife, making Michael's skin prickle. He stopped walking. Another scream followed, more desperate than the first. "Help! Somebody help me!" Michael broke into a run, rounding the corner onto Maple Drive. The scene before him made his blood run cold. Mr. Thompson was sprawled on his front lawn, trying to crawl backward. A large German shepherd stood over him, teeth bared, saliva dripping from its jaws. The dog's muscles were tense, ready to strike. "Please!" Mr. Thompson's voice cracked with terror. "Someone call 911. Neighbors began emerging from their homes, phones raised to record the scene. Nobody moved to help. Michael saw Mrs. Wilson, who always locked her car doors when he walked by, standing on her porch with her hand over her mouth. "Stay back, kid," someone shouted from across the street. "That dog's gone crazy." Michael's heart pounded against his ribs. His instincts screamed at him to run, to get away from the danger. But his feet remained planted on the sidewalk. Mr. Thompson tried to move again, and the dog growled deeper, taking a menacing step forward. The old man's eyes met Michael's, filled with a desperate plea that transcended their past interaction. I can't move," Mr. Thompson whimpered. Michael felt sweat beading on his forehead. All those books he'd been reading about animal behavior flashed through his mind. Would any of it actually help in a real situation? The crowd had grown larger. Someone was narrating for their social media live stream. "Oh my God, you guys, this is crazy. This dog is about to attack Mr. Thompson." Michael took a deep breath. His hands were shaking, but his mind was becoming surprisingly clear. He remembered a passage from one of his library books. Dogs often act aggressively out of fear or pain rather than genuine aggression. The German shepherd shifted its weight, and that's when Michael noticed it, a slight favoring of its back left leg. The dog was injured. A police siren wailed in the distance, but it sounded far away. Too far away. The dog's ears twitched at the siren. Its muscles bunched, preparing to lunge. Time seemed to slow down. Michael heard his mother's voice in his head. Sometimes being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified. He took a step forward. "Hey, kid," a man's voice called out. "Don't be stupid." But Michael had already made his decision. The same neighborhood that had judged him, feared him, and dismissed him was about to witness something they'd never forget. He took another step toward the dog and Mr. Thompson, his mind racing with everything he'd learned about canine behavior. The German shepherd's head snapped toward him, its attention divided now between 2 potential threats. The crowd fell silent. The only sounds were Mr. Thompson's ragged breathing the low growl of the dog, and Michael's own heartbeat thundering in his ears. This was it. This was the moment that would either prove everyone's prejudices right or change everything. And for Michael Johnson, standing on that manicured lawn under gathering storm clouds, there was no turning back. "Don't move, Mr. Thompson," he said quietly, his voice steadier than he felt. "Just stay absolutely still." The German shepherd's eyes locked onto Michael, and the world around them seemed to fade away. It was just a boy, a dog, and an elderly man whose life hung in the balance. Thunder cracked overhead, and the first drops of rain began to fall. The German shepherd's growl deepened as Michael took another careful step forward. Rain began falling harder now, forming dark spots on his gray shirt. The crowd behind him had grown silent, their phones still recording every moment. Michael's mind flashed back to that night 2 months ago. He'd been walking home late from his part-time job at the corner store, tired after a long shift. Mr. Thompson had been taking out his trash. Their eyes met under the streetlight, and without hesitation, the old man had crossed to the other side of the street, clutching his jacket closer, as if Michael were some kind of threat. Now that same man lay trembling on his lawn, looking up at Michael with desperate eyes. "Please," Mr. Thompson whispered, "don't let it kill me." The dog's ears flattened against its head. Michael noticed how its fur was matted in places, dirty. This wasn't someone's beloved pet, at least not anymore. This was a scared, injured animal. "Hey there," Michael said softly, remembering the chapters he'd read about approaching aggressive dogs. "Hey, big guy." Someone in the crowd snickered. "Is he seriously trying to talk to it?" "Shut up," another voice hissed. "At least he's doing something." The dog took a threatening step toward Michael, its injured back leg causing it to move awkwardly. Michael stopped moving, maintaining eye contact, but not staring too aggressively. His hands were visible, held low, and relaxed at his sides. "I see you're hurt," Michael continued in the same calm voice. "That must be scary, being in pain and not knowing who to trust." Rain ran down his face, but he didn't dare wipe it away. Any sudden movement could trigger an attack. The crowd had backed up further, leaving Michael alone in an expanding circle with the dog and Mr. Thompson. Mrs. Wilson's voice carried from her porch. "The police are 3 minutes out." 3 minutes. Michael wasn't sure Mr. Thompson had 3 minutes. The old man was trying to suppress his shivering, but his fear was palpable. The German shepherd sensed it too, turning its attention back to him with renewed aggression. "Don't move," Michael said firmly to Mr. Thompson. "Whatever happens, don't move." The old man gave a tiny nod, rainwater running down his pale face. His white hair was plastered to his forehead, and his usually pristine golf shirt was stained with grass and mud. Michael took another step forward, then another. The dog's growl intensified, but he noticed something important. It was backing up slightly, maintaining the same distance between them. This wasn't a dog looking for a fight. This was a dog looking for an escape route. "I know what it's like," Michael said softly, the words coming from somewhere deep inside him. "Being judged before anyone knows who you really are. Being feared for no reason." The dog's ears twitched at his voice. Someone in the crowd gasped as Michael moved closer still. He could smell the wet dog fur now, see the way its chest heaved with each breath. The injury on its back leg looked raw, possibly from jumping a fence or getting caught on something. "There you go," Michael murmured. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." A car door slammed somewhere down the street, and the dog jerked its head toward the sound. In that split second, Mr. Thompson tried to scramble backward. The dog's attention snapped back, muscles bunching to lunge. "No!" Michael shouted, not at the dog, but at Mr. Thompson. "Don't move!" The old man froze. The dog's teeth were bared again, but something had changed. It was looking between Michael and Mr. Thompson rapidly, as if unsure which was the bigger threat. Michael knew he had seconds to act. The dog was going to make a choice, fight or flight, and that choice would determine whether someone died on this lawn today. Rain pounded against the pavement. Thunder rolled overhead. Michael could hear sirens getting closer, but they weren't close enough. "Look at me," he said to the dog, his voice firm but gentle. "Right here. Look at me." The German shepherd's eyes locked onto his. Michael saw his own reflection in those dark pupils, a tall, skinny black teenager in a wet gray shirt, doing something either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Maybe both. He thought about his mother, how she'd react if she saw him right now. She'd probably be terrified, but she'd also understand. She was the one who'd taught him that courage wasn't about being fearless. More car doors slammed in the distance. The dog's muscles tensed again. Michael made his choice. He slowly, deliberately, knelt down on the wet grass. The crowd behind him erupted in shocked whispers. He was making himself vulnerable, putting himself at the dog's level. If it attacked now, his throat would be exposed. "It's okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's okay to be scared, but I'm not going to hurt you, and I'm not going to let you hurt anyone else either." The dog took a single step toward him, then another. Its growl had softened to a confused whine. Michael held his breath. Everything he'd read about dog behavior, every instinct he possessed, every ounce of courage he could muster, it all came down to this moment. The German Shepherd was close enough now that Michael could feel its breath. Behind it, Mr. Thompson watched with wide eyes, not daring to move a muscle. "That's it," Michael whispered. "That's it, buddy. We're all friends here." The dog's nose twitched, taking in Michael's scent. Its tail, which had been rigid with aggression, lowered slightly. In the distance, police sirens grew louder. But Michael didn't hear them. His entire world had narrowed to this moment, this connection he was trying to forge with a frightened, injured animal. The rain continued to fall, but neither boy nor dog seemed to notice anymore. They were locked in a silent conversation, one that transcended species and fear and prejudice. Michael slowly, ever so slowly, raised his hand. Michael's raised hand hung in the air between them, raindrops running down his arm. The German Shepherd stared at it, nostrils flaring. Behind them, someone in the crowd whispered, "Oh my God." "Easy now," Michael said softly. "Easy?" The dog's ears twitched at his voice. Its aggressive stance had softened, but danger still lingered in its eyes. One wrong move could undo everything. A police car turned onto the street, its sirens cutting through the rain. The dog tensed. No, look at me," Michael said quickly, keeping his voice steady. "Right here. Just focus on me." The German Shepherd's attention snapped back to him. Michael could see the police car in his peripheral vision, but he didn't dare turn his head. "Stay in your vehicles," someone from the crowd shouted to the approaching officers. "The kid's getting through to it." The police car stopped, its sirens dying, but lights still flashing. Michael blocked it all out. He remembered what he'd read about dogs being able to sense fear and tension. Right now, he needed to be the calmest person on this street. "You've got a pretty bad cut on that leg," he said to the dog, nodding slightly toward its injury. "Must hurt a lot. No wonder you're scared." The German Shepherd's tail moved slightly, not quite a wag, but no longer rigid with aggression. Its eyes stayed fixed on Michael's face. Mr. Thompson remained frozen on the grass, his breathing shallow. "Michael," he whispered, speaking directly to the boy for the first time ever. "Be careful, son." The use of his name, the word son, it caught Michael off guard for a moment. This was the same man who'd crossed the street to avoid him. Now here they were, their lives intertwined in this tense moment. The dog took another step toward Michael's outstretched hand. Its nose twitched, sampling his scent. "That's right," Michael encouraged. "You can trust me. I'm not going to hurt you." A low whine escaped the dog's throat, not aggressive now, but uncertain. Scared. Michael saw himself in that sound, in that fear. How many times had he felt like a cornered animal in this neighborhood, judged and feared for no reason? "I know, buddy," he said. "I know exactly how you feel." The German Shepherd's nose touched his fingers. The crowd collectively held its breath. Even the rain seemed to quiet for a moment. Michael remained absolutely still as the dog sniffed his hand. He could feel its warm breath against his skin, see the way its muscles were still tense, ready to flee or fight. "Good boy," he whispered. "You're such a good boy." The dog's tail moved again, a bit more pronounced this time. Its ears had perked up slightly, no longer flattened against its head in aggression. That's when they heard the shout. "Max! Oh God, Max!" A man came running down the street, his business suit soaked through. The German Shepherd's head snapped up. "Sir, stay back," an officer called out. But the dog's entire demeanor had changed. Its tail was wagging now, and it let out a different kind of whine, one of recognition. "He's yours?" Michael asked the approaching man, keeping his voice calm despite the sudden change in situation. The man stopped a few yards away, breathing hard. Yes, he got out this morning. He's been missing all day. He's never acted like this before. He's hurt," Michael explained, still not moving from his position. "His back leg, and he's scared." The man, clearly Max's owner, looked devastated. "He jumped our fence? I've been searching for hours." Michael slowly moved his hand to scratch behind Max's ears. The dog leaned into his touch. "Sir," Michael said to the owner, "can you call him?" Calmly, the man nodded, taking a deep breath. "Max," he said softly. "Come here, boy." The German shepherd's tail wagged harder, but he looked at Michael as if asking permission. "Go on," Michael said gently. "Go to your dad." Max took a step toward his owner, then another. His injured leg made him limp, but the aggression was gone. He was just a lost, hurt dog who wanted to go home. The owner dropped to his knees, arms open. Max limped to him, whining. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," the man said, hugging his dog. "I'm so sorry, boy." Only then did Michael finally stand up, his legs shaking slightly from the tension and the cold rain. He turned to Mr. Thompson, who was still on the ground. "Let's get you up, sir," he said, extending his hand to the old man. Mr. Thompson stared at the offered hand for a moment, then took it. Michael helped him to his feet, steadying him when he swayed slightly. Mr. Thompson started, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say." The crowd began to move closer now that the danger had passed. Police officers approached, followed by paramedics who'd arrived during the standoff. "Are you hurt, Mr. Thompson?" one of the paramedics asked. No, I'm fine. Thanks to..." He turned to Michael, but the boy had already stepped back, making room for the medical professionals. The owner was talking to a police officer, explaining about Max's escape and the injury he must have gotten while jumping the fence. The German shepherd stayed pressed against his leg, all signs of aggression gone. Mrs. Wilson approached Michael, clutching her cardigan closed against the rain. That was amazing." Michael just nodded, suddenly very aware of all the eyes on him. Some people were still recording with their phones. Others were talking in excited whispers. "I should get home," he said quietly. "My mom will be worried." "Wait," Mr. Thompson called out. "Michael, please wait." But Michael was already walking away, his wet shoes squeaking slightly on the pavement. Behind him, he could hear people calling his name, trying to get him to stay. He kept walking, his heart still racing, his hand still tingling where Max's nose had touched it. The rain was letting up, but thunder still rumbled in the distance. Tomorrow, things would be different. He knew that. But right now, he just wanted to go home, change into dry clothes, and process what had just happened. As he turned the corner onto his street, Michael heard sirens in the distance. More emergency vehicles arriving at the scene he'd just left. He wondered what they'd find when they got there. A scared dog now calm with its owner, an old man who'd faced death and survived, and a crowd of people who'd just witnessed something they'd never forget. But mostly, he wondered what his mom would say when she heard about all this. Michael's clothes were still damp when his mom got home that night. He heard her key in the lock and braced himself for what was coming. News traveled fast in Highland Park. "Michael." Her voice was tense. "Michael." "In the kitchen, Mom." Sarah Johnson rushed in, still wearing her cleaning uniform from her second job. Her eyes were wide with worry as she scanned him for injuries. "I'm okay, Mom," he said quickly. "I'm fine. Mrs. Wilson called me at work." She grabbed his face between her hands, turning it side to side. "Said something about you and a dog and Mr. Thompson." "Mom, really, I'm okay." She pulled him into a tight hug, then pushed him back to arm's length. "What were you thinking? You could have been killed." Before Michael could answer, someone knocked on the front door. They both turned to look. "Who?" Sarah started. "It's probably reporters," Michael said. "They've been driving by for the last hour." Another knock, more insistent this time. Sarah straightened her uniform and went to answer it. Michael heard her sharp intake of breath. "Mr. Thompson?" Michael came to the door. The old man stood on their small porch, looking uncomfortable but determined. He'd changed into dry clothes, but his face was still pale from the afternoon's events. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, nodding politely. "I apologize for coming by so late, but I needed to speak with your son." Sarah looked at Michael, then back at Mr. Thompson. "Of course. Please come in." Their living room was small and worn, but meticulously clean. Mr. Thompson sat carefully in their old armchair, while Sarah and Michael took the couch. "I owe you an apology," Mr. Thompson said, looking directly at Michael. "Several apologies, actually." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, you don't." "Yes, I do." Mr. Thompson's voice was firm. "What you did today, it wasn't just brave. It was extraordinary, and it made me realize how wrong I've been. About so many things." Sarah reached for Michael's hand, squeezing it. "That night, 2 months ago," Mr. Thompson continued, "when I crossed the street, I want you to know how ashamed I am of that." Michael felt his throat tighten. He hadn't expected this. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years, Mr. Thompson said. "Watched it change, and somewhere along the way, I let fear and prejudice cloud my judgment. Today, the young man I crossed the street to avoid saved my life. A car slowed down outside their house, probably another news van. They'd been circling the neighborhood since the video had gone viral. The thing is," Mr. Thompson leaned forward slightly, "you didn't just save me from that dog. You showed everyone who watched that video what real character looks like. Including me." Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek. "My boy," she said softly. "He's always been special." "Yes, he has." Mr. Thompson pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Which is why I'd like to offer you both something." Michael tensed. He didn't want money for what he'd done. "Mrs. Johnson," Mr. Thompson turned to Sarah. "I understand you work 2 jobs?" She nodded, still holding Michael's hand. "I own several properties in Sacramento, including a real estate management company. We've been looking for someone to oversee tenant relations. The position comes with full benefits and a substantial salary increase from what you're currently making. Would you be interested?" Sarah's hand tightened on Michael's. "Mr. Thompson, You're qualified," he said quickly. "More than qualified. Managing multiple jobs, raising a son like Michael. You clearly have excellent organizational and people skills." Another knock at the door made them all jump. Through the window, they could see camera lights. "They're not going away," Mr. Thompson said. "What happened today, what you did, Michael, people need to hear about it. Especially now." Michael stood up suddenly. "I didn't do it for attention." "I know," Mr. Thompson said softly. "That's exactly why this matters so much." Sarah got up to peek through the curtains. "There are 3 news vans out there now." "I have a suggestion," Mr. Thompson said. "Tomorrow morning, I'm holding a press conference at my house. Nothing big, just a statement about what happened. Michael, I'd like you to be there. You don't have to speak if you don't want to, but I think it's important for people to see us together." Michael looked at his mom. She smiled encouragingly. "Okay," he said, "but I don't want this to be some big racial thing. I just did what anyone should have done." "But that's just it," Mr. Thompson replied. "Nobody else did. They all stood there filming. You were the only one who acted." More knocking at the door. Someone called out, "Channel 7 News." "I'll have my driver pick you both up at 9 tomorrow morning," Mr. Thompson said, standing. "And Mrs. Johnson, please think about the job offer. We can discuss details tomorrow." Sarah walked him to the door. When she opened it, camera lights flooded in. Mr. Thompson turned to the reporters with a firm expression. "Any statements will be made at tomorrow's press conference. For now, please respect this family's privacy." He made his way through the small crowd to his car, where a driver waited. The reporters turned back to the house, but Sarah closed the door firmly. "Mom?" Michael said quietly. "Are you okay?" She turned to him, tears in her eyes, but a smile on her face. "A real job. Benefits. No more cleaning houses. You deserve it." She hugged him tight. "You know what else I deserve? A son who's alive and not bitten by some angry dog. Promise me you won't do anything that crazy again." Michael hugged her back. "Can't promise that. You're the one who taught me to help people when they need it." Sarah laughed through her tears. "Using my own words against me. When did you get so grown up?" Outside, they could hear reporters talking into their cameras. The story was already spreading. By morning, everything would be different. Michael thought about Max, the German Shepherd. How fear and pain had made him act aggressively. How all he needed was someone to understand, to show him a little compassion. "Mom," he said, "about tomorrow." "Yes. I think I should say something at the press conference. Not for me, but people need to hear that fear doesn't have to control us, that we can choose to help each other." Sarah touched his cheek gently. "When did my little boy become so wise?" Another knock at the door made them both jump. "But maybe we should stay away from the windows for now," Michael said, grinning. They spent the rest of the evening in the kitchen, eating pizza and ignoring the occasional camera flash outside. Tomorrow would bring changes, but for now, they had this moment, a mother and son, safe and together, on the night everything started to shift. The next morning arrived with a buzz of activity on their quiet street. Michael stood at his window, watching news vans set up their equipment. The sky was clear after yesterday's storm, sunlight glinting off camera lenses and satellite dishes. "Michael?" His mom called from downstairs. "The car's here." He adjusted his tie one last time, borrowed from a neighbor who'd brought it over last night, along with cookies and endless praise for his bravery. The suit was also borrowed, slightly too big, but the best they could do on short notice. A sleek black car waited in their driveway, the driver holding the door open. Neighbors peered from their windows and porches as Michael and his mom walked out. "Good morning," the driver said warmly. "Mr. Thompson is expecting you." The ride was short but surreal. Camera crews followed their car, and people pointed as they passed. Michael saw kids from his school standing on corners with their phones out. "You okay?" his mom asked, squeezing his hand. "Yeah, just different." They pulled up to Mr. Thompson's house. The lawn where everything had happened yesterday was now covered with chairs and a small podium. News crews lined the sidewalk, and a crowd had already gathered. Max's owner stood near the garage, the German Shepherd by his side. The dog had a bandage on his back leg, but looked calm, nothing like the aggressive animal from yesterday. "Michael," the owner, Michael now knew his name was David Chun, waved them over. "Max has been waiting to see you." Michael approached carefully, but there was no need for caution. Max's tail started wagging immediately, and he strained against his leash to reach Michael. "Hey, buddy," Michael said, kneeling down. Max licked his face enthusiastically. "Feeling better today?" "The vet said it's just a bad cut," David explained. "He must have caught it on the fence when he escaped. Another week, and he'll be good as new." Camera shutters clicked rapidly, capturing the reunion. Michael heard reporters calling questions, but Mr. Thompson's security team kept them at bay. "Michael." Mr. Thompson appeared at the garage door. "Could we speak privately before the press conference?" Inside Mr. Thompson's study, Michael sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than everything in his house combined. Sarah sat beside him while Mr. Thompson settled behind his desk. "I've prepared a statement," the old man said, "but before I make it, I wanted to run something by you both." He pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. Sarah opened it and gasped. "This is—" She started. "A college fund," Mr. Thompson finished. "Full ride to any university Michael chooses, when the time comes." Michael felt the room spin slightly. "Sir, I can't." "You can and you will," Mr. Thompson said firmly. "What you did yesterday wasn't just about saving an old man from a dog. You showed this entire community something about courage, about looking past prejudice. That deserves to be recognized." Sarah was crying silently, staring at the documents. "There's more," Mr. Thompson continued. "The job offer stands, Mrs. Johnson. But I'd also like to offer you housing in one of my properties. 3 bedrooms, good neighborhood, close to the office. No rent." Michael stood up suddenly. "Why are you doing all this?" Mr. Thompson didn't answer immediately. He walked to his window, looking out at the gathering crowd. "Because I've been wrong for a very long time," he said finally, "about a lot of things. And while I can't fix everyone's prejudices, I can try to right my own wrongs." A knock at the study door interrupted them. "5 minutes until the press conference, sir." Michael looked at his mom, who was still holding the folder like it might disappear. "Mom?" She wiped her eyes and stood up. "We accept. All of it." "Thank you, Mr. Thompson." The old man smiled. "No, thank you. Both of you. Now, shall we face the cameras?" The sunlight was bright as they stepped outside. The crowd had grown larger. Neighbors, school kids, local politicians sensing a photo opportunity. Michael saw his principal standing near the front row. Max was lying calmly by David's feet now, occasionally wagging his tail when someone walked past. The dog's eyes followed Michael as he took his seat beside the podium. Mr. Thompson stepped up to the microphone. Camera lights flashed. Michael heard the whir of video cameras starting to record. Yesterday afternoon, Mr. Thompson began, I experienced something that changed my life in more ways than one. He told the story clearly and honestly, not shying away from his own prejudices and fears. When he described Michael's actions, the crowd murmured in appreciation. But this isn't just about a brave young man saving an old fool from a scared dog, Mr. Thompson continued. This is about seeing past our fears, about recognizing the humanity in each other. More cameras flashed. Michael saw reporters scribbling frantically in their notepads. Michael Johnson didn't just save my life yesterday. He showed this entire community what we could be, what we should be, if we'd only look past our prejudices and fear. Mr. Thompson turned to Michael. Would you like to say something? Michael hadn't planned to speak, but suddenly he knew he had to. He stood and walked to the podium, adjusting the microphone down to his height. Yesterday, he started, his voice carrying clearly across the lawn. I was just walking home from the library. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I wasn't trying to make a statement. He looked at Max, who wagged his tail. I saw someone who needed help. That's all. And I knew something about dogs because I'd been reading about them. That's it. Simple as that. The crowd was silent now, hanging on his words. But here's what I learned. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't the dog. It's our own fear. Of each other. Of what we don't understand. And maybe if we all just took a moment to look past that fear, to see each other as people first. His voice trailed off as he saw his mom crying again, smiling through her tears. Thank you, he finished, simply stepping back. The applause started slowly, then built until it echoed down the street. Max barked once, as if adding his own approval. Mr. Thompson shook Michael's hand as cameras flashed again. But it wasn't the stiff, formal handshake of yesterday's world. It was warm, genuine, the handshake of equals. The world had shifted, just a little bit. And it had started right here, on this lawn, with a boy, a dog, and the courage to look past fear. The press conference ended, but the day was far from over. Reporters swarmed around Michael as security tried to maintain order. Camera lights flashed from every direction. Michael, how does it feel to be a hero? Were you scared? What made you step forward when no one else would? Mr. Thompson's security team formed a barrier, guiding Michael and his mom back toward the house. Max trotted alongside them, still wagging his tail, seemingly enjoying all the attention. Inside, Mr. Thompson's housekeeper had prepared lunch. The formal dining room felt surreal, crystal glasses and fine china, when just yesterday Michael had been eating pizza from a paper plate. The media circus will die down soon, Mr. Thompson said, passing a plate of sandwiches. But for now, you're both welcome to stay here as long as you need. Sarah checked her phone. I have so many messages. My sister in Atlanta says you're on their local news too. It's gone national, David Chin confirmed, scrolling through his own phone. The video of Michael calming Max has over 2 million views already. Michael stared at his sandwich, barely hearing the conversation around him. Everything felt overwhelming. The college fund, the new house, his mom's job offer, the reporters outside. A wet nose nudged his hand. Max had settled beside his chair, looking up at him with those intelligent eyes. At least you're not treating me differently, Michael muttered, scratching behind the dog's ears. Sorry, what was that? Mr. Thompson asked. Nothing, sir. Just talking to Max. A knock at the dining room door made them all look up. A tall man in an expensive suit stood there, looking apologetic. Mr. Thompson, the mayor is here. He's asking to speak with Michael. Sarah straightened in her chair. The mayor? Send him in, Mr. Thompson said, then turned to Michael. Only if you're comfortable with it. Before Michael could answer, Mayor Richardson walked in, his media smile already in place. Young man, what an incredible story. Simply incredible. More handshakes, more photos. The mayor wanted to present Michael with a city commendation. Would next week work for a ceremony at City Hall? Actually, Michael said quietly, I'd rather not. The room fell silent. The mayor's smile flickered. I appreciate it, Michael continued, but I didn't do this for awards or ceremonies. I just helped someone who needed help. That's all it was supposed to be. Mr. Thompson leaned forward. Michael, sometimes these ceremonies aren't just about the person being honored. They're about setting an example for others. Then set an example by actually changing things, Michael said, surprising himself with his boldness. How about programs to help kids in my neighborhood get the same opportunities I'm getting now? How about addressing why people crossed the street when they saw me coming before all this happened? The mayor's smile had completely disappeared now. Sarah reached for Michael's hand under the table, but she wasn't trying to stop him. She was supporting him. You make some excellent points, Mayor Richardson said slowly. Perhaps we could discuss some community initiatives. I'd be happy to help fund those initiatives, Mr. Thompson added. In fact, I insist on it. More discussion followed, but Michael had stopped listening. Max had fallen asleep with his head on Michael's foot, completely at peace. Through the dining room window, he could see reporters still camped out on the lawn, but they seemed less important now. His phone buzzed, a text from his best friend Marcus. Bro, you're literally everywhere. CNN just showed the video. Another text came in, this one from his English teacher. Your essay on overcoming fear is going to be very interesting this semester. Michael. His mom's voice brought him back to the conversation. What do you think? Sorry, what? About starting a foundation, Mr. Thompson explained. In your name. To promote unity in the community, provide scholarships, support programs for underprivileged youth. Michael looked around the table, at the mayor with his political smile, at Mr. Thompson with his genuine desire to make amends, at David Chun who kept thanking him for saving his dog, at his mom who hadn't stopped smiling all day. Can we call it something else? He asked. Not my name. Maybe? The Second Chance Foundation? Second chance? The mayor asked. Yeah, because everyone deserves one. People who make mistakes, people who get judged unfairly, scared dogs who just need someone to understand them. Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. The Second Chance Foundation. I like it. More details were discussed. Paperwork to sign, meetings to schedule, interviews to coordinate. Michael let the adults handle it, focusing instead on Max's steady breathing against his foot. Later, as the sun began to set, security finally cleared the last of the reporters from the lawn. Michael stood at the same window where Mr. Thompson had spotted Max yesterday, setting everything in motion. Penny for your thoughts? His mom appeared beside him, just thinking about how different everything is. Yesterday at this time, I was just the black kid people avoided. Now they're talking about naming foundations after me. Sarah wrapped an arm around his shoulders. You were never just anything, baby. The world just needed a reminder of that. Mrs. Johnson? Mr. Thompson's housekeeper appeared. The guest rooms are ready whenever you'd like to see them. Guest rooms? Michael asked. Just until we get the new house sorted out, his mom explained. Mr. Thompson thinks it's safer than going home with all the media attention. Michael nodded. Their small house would be overwhelmed by reporters. Still, it felt strange, sleeping in this mansion where, just yesterday, he'd been an outsider. Oh, and Michael? The housekeeper smiled. Max's owner asked if you'd like to help with his training sessions. He thinks the dog listens to you better than anyone. For the first time all day, Michael felt truly happy. Not because of the attention or the opportunities or the foundation, but because a dog who had been scared and angry now trusted him enough to need him. Yeah, he said, I'd like that. Night fell over Highland Park. In houses across the neighborhood, families watched the news coverage of the day's events. Children asked their parents why everyone was making such a big deal about a boy helping a dog. Parents struggled to explain prejudice and redemption to young minds. And in Mr. Thompson's guest room, Michael Johnson lay awake, listening to the quiet house, wondering what tomorrow would bring. His phone kept buzzing with notifications, but he'd turn it off. Tomorrow would be soon enough to face the world again. For now, he just needed to process everything. How a single moment of courage had rippled out to touch so many lives. How fear could be overcome, not just with bravery, but with understanding. A scratch at his door made him smile. He opened it to find Max waiting, tail wagging. Can't sleep either, huh? The dog padded into the room and settled on the rug beside the bed. Michael sat down next to him, scratching his ears. You know what, Max? I think we're both going to be okay. The German Shepherd sighed contentedly, and for the first time since everything happened, Michael felt completely at peace. Michael woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the sound of voices downstairs. For a moment, he forgot where he was. The guest room was bigger than his entire bedroom at home. Max had stayed with him all night, and now the dog raised his head from the rug, tail thumping against the floor. Morning, buddy, Michael said, stretching. His phone lay silent on the nightstand where he'd left it, still turned off. He wasn't ready to face it yet. A knock at the door made both him and Max look up. Michael. His mom's voice. Are you awake? Yeah, come in. Sarah opened the door, already dressed in a smart business suit. One of several Mr. Thompson's assistant had brought over last night for a new job. How do I look? She asked, smoothing down the jacket. Like a boss. Michael grinned. Well, that's good, because apparently I am one now. She sat on the edge of his bed. There's something we need to talk about before you go downstairs. Michael sat up straighter. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. It's just the story's gotten even bigger overnight. Mr. Thompson says there are reporters from every major network downstairs wanting to interview you. Ellen DeGeneres' people called. Ellen? Michael felt his stomach drop. Mom, I know, baby. I told them you're not doing any TV appearances right now. But there is one interview Mr. Thompson thinks you should consider. She handed him her tablet. On the screen was an email from Michelle Obama's office. Michael read it twice, not quite believing the words. The former First Lady wanted to feature him in her youth leadership initiative. This is real? Sarah nodded. Very real. She says your story represents everything she's been trying to promote about breaking down barriers and showing courage in difficult moments. Max moved to put his head on Michael's lap, sensing his tension. What do you think I should do? Michael asked. I think you should do whatever feels right to you. But remember what you said yesterday about wanting to make real changes? This could be a way to do that. Before Michael could respond, another knock came at the door. Mr. Thompson's housekeeper poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here Michael might want to see. They followed her downstairs, Max trotting beside them. The entrance hall was crowded with reporters being held back by security, but through the front window, Michael saw something that made him smile. Marcus, his best friend since third grade, stood on the front steps arguing with a security guard. Come on, man. I've known him forever. Just ask him, Michael. Michael nodded to the security guard. He's okay. Let him in. Marcus burst through the door and grabbed Michael in a bear hug. Bro, you're famous. I'm not famous, Michael protested, but he was laughing. Are you kidding? You're everywhere. The whole school's talking about it. Principal Stevens announced an assembly about your heroic actions and community unity. Michael groaned. Please tell me you're joking. Nope. Oh. And you might want to check Instagram. Jenny Martinez has been posting about her close personal friend, Michael Johnson, all morning. Jenny Martinez? She's never even spoken to me. Well, she wants to speak to you now. Marcus wiggled his eyebrows suggestively. Sarah cleared her throat. Boys, breakfast is ready in the dining room. Marcus, you're welcome to join us. They headed to the dining room, where Mr. Thompson was already seated with David Chun and several other people Michael didn't recognize. Michael. Good morning. I trust your mother told you about Mrs. Obama's invitation? Marcus's jaw dropped. Mrs. Who? Over breakfast, Michael learned that the video of him calming Max had been viewed over 5 million times. Hashtag BlackBoyJoy and hashtag CompassionWins were trending on Twitter. Several major news outlets had run editorials about race relations and community unity. The governor called this morning, one of Mr. Thompson's associates said. He'd like to recognize Michael at the state capitol next week. Michael pushed his eggs around his plate. What about school? I have tests coming up. Dude, Marcus kicked him under the table. The governor wants to meet you, and you're worried about algebra? Education comes first, Sarah said firmly. Any appearances or interviews will have to work around Michael's school schedule. Mr. Thompson nodded approvingly. Of course. Speaking of which, I've taken the liberty of having my security team coordinate with the school. They'll make sure Michael isn't overwhelmed by attention when he returns. Security team? Michael and Marcus said simultaneously. Just temporarily, Mr. Thompson assured them. Until things calmed down. After breakfast, Marcus had to leave for school. He bumped fists with Michael at the door. This is crazy, man. But if anybody deserves it, it's you. Through the window, Michael could see the crowd of reporters still waiting. Someone had set up a satellite truck on the street. Hey, Marcus, he called as his friend headed down the steps. Tell Jenny Martinez I said hi. Marcus's laughter was drowned out by reporter questions as security escorted him through the crowd. Back inside, Michael finally turned on his phone. It immediately began buzzing with hundreds of notifications. Text messages, voicemails, social media alerts. All from people wanting to talk about yesterday. Max nudged his hand with his nose. Yeah, Michael said, scratching the dog's ears. I miss when it was just us two. Michael. Mr. Thompson appeared in the hallway. There are some people I'd like you to meet. They're from the Second Chance Foundation, lawyers and organizers who can help us set everything up. In Mr. Thompson's study, Michael spent the next few hours listening to plans and proposals. The foundation would focus on three main areas: education opportunities for underprivileged youth, community unity programs, and animal welfare initiatives. We thought the animal welfare component was important, one of the lawyers explained, given how your story started. Michael nodded, watching Max doze in the corner. The dog's injured leg was healing well, another second chance story in the making. There's one more thing, Mr. Thompson said as the meeting wound down. The limousine will be here at 2. Limousine? For the house viewing. The property I mentioned yesterday? It's ready whenever you and your mother want to see it. Michael thought about their small house, probably still surrounded by reporters. About his mom's face when she tried to hide how tired she was after working 2 jobs. About how everything had changed in less than 24 hours. Can Max come with us? He asked. Mr. Thompson smiled. Of course. He seems quite attached to you. Looking around the study at all these people planning foundations and programs because of one moment of courage, Michael felt overwhelmed again. But then he felt Max's wet nose against his hand, grounding him, reminding him that sometimes the simplest actions had the biggest impacts. Okay, he said, let's go see this house. The limousine glided through the streets of Sacramento's most prestigious neighborhood, drawing stares from people on the sidewalks. Michael sat between his mom and Max, still trying to process everything. Here we are, the driver announced, turning onto a tree-lined street. The house took Michael's breath away. Not because it was huge, it wasn't, at least not compared to Mr. Thompson's mansion, but because it was perfect. 2 stories, brick and stone, with a wraparound porch and a fenced backyard. This is it, Sarah whispered. Mr. Thompson was waiting in the driveway. What do you think? It's beautiful, Sarah managed. They toured the house slowly. 3 bedrooms upstairs, an office that could be Michael's study room, a modern kitchen that made Sarah tear up when she saw it. The backyard had enough space for Max to run around. David had agreed to joint custody of the dog, seeing how attached he'd become to Michael. There's one more thing, Mr. Thompson said, leading them to the garage. He flipped a switch, and lights came on to reveal a new Toyota SUV. The job comes with a company car. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Mr. Thompson, this is too much. It's not enough, he interrupted. Not for what your son taught me. Not for all the years I spent judging people without knowing them. Michael wandered to the backyard while the adults discussed details. Max followed him, investigating every corner of what might become his second home. Like it? Michael asked the dog. Max's tail wagged in response. A noise from the front of the house caught their attention. Cars pulling up, voices. Michael went back inside to find several news crews setting up on the lawn. I may have mentioned to the press that we'd be making an announcement, Mr. Thompson admitted. Before Michael could protest, a familiar face emerged from one of the news vans. Jenny Martinez's father, the local news anchor. Michael, Mr. Martinez called out. Mind if we get a few words? Jenny herself appeared behind her father, smiling shyly at Michael. She looked different than she did at school, where she usually ignored his existence. Michael started, but Mr. Thompson stepped in. Let's make this official, he said. A proper statement about the Second Chance Foundation and its first initiatives. The next hour was a blur of cameras and questions. Mr. Thompson announced the foundation's formation, with Michael and Sarah as board members. The house would serve as a model for the foundation's housing program, helping families transition to better neighborhoods. Michael, Mr. Martinez asked, what would you say to other young people who want to make a difference? Michael thought about it, scratching Max's ears. I'd say, don't wait for permission to do the right thing. Don't let fear stop you. And don't assume you know someone's story just by looking at them. Ginny's smile widened at his words. Marcus was never going to let him hear the end of this. After the press conference, Mr. Thompson gathered everyone in the new house's living room. The furniture had already been moved in, modern, comfortable pieces that somehow looked like they'd always belonged to them. There's one more announcement, he said, pulling out an envelope. The governor's office just confirmed. They're declaring next Monday Unity in Action Day across the state, with Michael as the keynote speaker at the Capitol. Sarah grabbed Michael's hand. A state holiday? More of a day of recognition, Mr. Thompson explained. Focusing on community service, breaking down barriers, promoting understanding. Everything Michael demonstrated that day with Max. Michael looked around the room, at his mom trying not to cry, and Mr. Thompson, who'd completely transformed from the man who once crossed the street to avoid him, at Ginny Martinez sneaking glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking, at Max lying contentedly at his feet. Can I say something? He asked. Everyone fell silent. All of this, the house, the foundation, the recognition, it's amazing. But it shouldn't take something dramatic for us to see each other as people. We shouldn't need a scared dog and a viral video to remind us that we're all just human. Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. You're right, which is exactly why we need voices like yours, to remind us before something dramatic happens. More people arrived throughout the afternoon, community leaders, school officials, reporters from national networks. Michael's phone kept buzzing with messages from classmates who'd seen him on TV. Ginny approached him during a quiet moment. So, there's a school dance next Friday? Yeah. Michael tried to sound casual, though his heart was racing. Maybe we could. Max chose that moment to insert himself between them, tail wagging. Ginny laughed and knelt to pet him. He's a good judge of character, Michael said. Like owner, like dog. Ginny smiled up at him. The sun was setting by the time the last visitors left. Sarah stood on the porch of their new house, watching the news vans drive away. Ready to go home and pack? She asked Michael. Home. Their old house suddenly felt like a distant memory, even though they'd slept there just 2 nights ago. Can we bring Max to help? Michael asked. I think that can be arranged, Mr. Thompson said. David already dropped off his favorite bed and some toys. As they drove back to their old neighborhood in their new car, Sarah still getting used to the feeling of being behind the wheel of something so nice. Michael thought about how quickly life could change. Just 3 days ago, he'd been the kid people avoided. Now he was going to speak at the state capitol, had a foundation named after his ideas, and might even have a date for the school dance. But more importantly, he'd shown people that courage didn't always roar. Sometimes it was just a boy, seeing past his own fear to help someone in need. Max's head rested on his lap as they drove, the dog completely at peace. In his own way, Max had been just as much a catalyst for change as Michael. 2 beings who others had misjudged coming together to show everyone a better way. The sun set over Sacramento, painting the sky in colors of promise. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more opportunities, more chances to prove that one moment of compassion could change everything. But for now, Michael was content to sit in their new car, with his mom humming happily beside him and a German shepherd drooling on his jeans, heading toward a future that looked nothing like the past. 1 month later, Michael stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie. The new house still felt a bit like a dream sometimes, but he was getting used to it. Through his window, he could see Max playing in the backyard. The dog now split his time between their house and David's, bringing joy to both homes. Michael, his mom called from downstairs. Don't want to be late. Today was his first official speech as the face of the Second Chance Foundation. The past month had been a whirlwind, moving, settling into their new life, watching his mom thrive in her new job. She smiled more now, the exhaustion lines around her eyes fading. He grabbed his prepared speech from his desk and headed downstairs. Sarah was in the kitchen, looking professional in her business suit, making coffee in their fancy new machine. "Ready?" she asked. "I think so." He patted his pocket, checking for the speech again. "Is Mr. Thompson meeting us there?" "He's already at the community center, overseeing the final preparations." The community center had been the foundation's first major project. They converted an abandoned building in Michael's old neighborhood into a space for youth programs, job training, and his favorite part, an animal rehabilitation center. Max greeted them at the door, tail wagging. He was coming too, a living symbol of the foundation's message about second chances and looking past first impressions. Their new Toyota pulled up to the community center 30 minutes later. The parking lot was already full. News vans lined the street, but they weren't as numerous as before. The story had evolved from viral sensation to something more meaningful. "Michael!" Jenny was waiting by the entrance. They'd been dating for 3 weeks now, ever since the school dance. She knelt to greet Max first. She'd learned quickly that the dog demanded attention before anyone else. Inside, the transformation was incredible. The once empty building now buzzed with life. Kids from the neighborhood played in the recreation area, while their parents attended job training classes. The animal shelter wing, visible through large windows, housed several dogs and cats waiting for their own second chances. Mr. Thompson met them in the main hall. "Ready for the big speech?" Michael nodded. The hall was filling up with people, community members, media, local politicians. He spotted Marcus giving him a thumbs up from the third row. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Thompson approached the podium. "Welcome to the official opening of the Second Chance Community Center." The crowd applauded. Michael saw familiar faces everywhere. Neighbors from both his old and new communities, classmates, teachers. Even Mayor Richardson sat in the front row, though he looked slightly uncomfortable when Max stared at him. "1 month ago," Mr. Thompson continued, "a young man taught us all a valuable lesson about courage, compassion, and looking past our preconceptions. Today, that lesson has grown into something bigger than any of us imagined." He gestured to the walls where photos told the story. Michael with Max, the Foundation's youth programs, families receiving housing assistance, rescued animals finding new homes. But rather than listen to an old man talk, Mr. Thompson smiled. "I think we should hear from the person who started it all." "Michael?" More applause as Michael approached the podium. Max followed, sitting proudly beside him. Jenny squeezed his hand as he passed. Michael looked out at the crowd, then down at his prepared speech. Slowly, he folded the paper and put it in his pocket. "A month ago," he began, "I was just a kid walking home from the library. I hadn't planned to be brave. I hadn't planned to make a statement. I just saw someone who needed help, human and animal both, and did what felt right." The room was silent now, everyone listening. Since then, people have called me a hero. They've put me on TV, given me awards, asked me to speak at events. But the real heroes are in this room, right now. He gestured to the crowd. The single parents working 2 jobs to give their kids a better life. The teachers staying late to help struggling students. The volunteers at our animal shelter giving lost pets another chance. The kids in our programs working hard to break cycles of poverty and prejudice. Sarah wiped a tear from her eye, smiling proudly. "This center isn't about me," Michael continued. "It's about all of us, about the choice we make every day to either look past our fears or let them control us, to either help or turn away, to either judge or understand." Max pressed against his leg supportively. "A month ago, people in my new neighborhood locked their cars when they saw me coming. Now, those same people trust me to babysit their kids. Not because I'm different. I'm the same person I always was. They just finally took the time to see me." He saw Mr. Thompson nodding, remembering their own history. That's what second chances are about. Not just big moments of courage, but small moments of understanding. Every time we choose to look past our assumptions, we give someone a second chance. Every time we help instead of turn away, we give ourselves a second chance to be better. The room erupted in applause. Michael saw reporters scribbling frantically, cameras flashing, but they didn't make him nervous anymore. So yes, this center is now open. But more importantly, our minds are open. Our hearts are open. And that's where real change begins. The The standing ovation lasted several minutes. Jenny was crying. Marcus was whooping. Sarah looked like she might burst with pride. Later, as people toured the facility, Michael stood in the animal shelter wing, watching families meet potential pets. Max sat beside him, his injured leg long healed, watching a small girl tentatively pet a rescued pit bull. "The dog that changed everything," David said, joining them. "Who would have thought?" Michael scratched Max's ears. He just needed someone to understand him. "Like we all do." Sarah appeared with Mr. Thompson, both looking pleased. "The mayor just pledged additional funding for the job training program," she announced. "And 3 more families have been approved for housing assistance," Mr. Thompson added. Michael smiled, watching the girl with the pit bull. Her parents looked nervous, but the dog was gentle, tail wagging hopefully. "Look," he pointed, "another second chance in the making." The family did end up adopting the pit bull. Michael helped them pick out supplies, sharing what he'd learned about gaining a dog's trust. Max supervised the whole process, occasionally offering approving tail wags. As the sun set over Sacramento, Michael stood on the community center's steps with his mom, Mr. Thompson, Jenny, and Max. The news vans were leaving, the crowds dispersing. Tomorrow would be a regular school day, as regular as things got now anyway. "Ready to go home?" Sarah asked. Home. The word had new meaning now. It wasn't just a place. It was this feeling, this knowledge that they were exactly where they were meant to be. "Yeah," Michael said. "Let's go home." Max's tail wagged as they walked to the car. Above them, stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and Max's ears perked up, but there was no fear in the sound, just another voice in the night, waiting to be understood. Michael smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that one moment of compassion could ripple out endlessly, changing lives in ways no one could predict. All because a boy chose to help, a dog chose to trust, and a community chose to change.